Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer of DATAVERSITY. We would like to thank you for joining the current installment of the monthly DATAVERSITY webinar series, Real World Data Governance with Bob Seiner. Today, Bob will discuss integrating AI into your data governance framework. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And to note, Zoom defaults the chat to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that to network with everyone. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A section. And to find the chat and the Q&A panels, you may click those icons in the bottom middle of your screen to activate those features. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides, the recording of this session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for this series, Bob Seiner. Bob is the president and principal of KIK Consulting and Educational Services and the publisher emeritus of the data administration newsletter, tdan.com. Bob specializes in non-invasive data governance, data stewardship, and metadata management solutions. And with that, I'll give the floor to Bob to get his presentation started. Hello and welcome.
Hi, Shannon. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this either live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good late night, wherever you are. This is another one, as I always say in these webinars, another one of the great topics that Shannon and I put together at the beginning of the year to cover the year. I spoke about this subject at the DGIQ conference in DC in December. This is not going to be a 3-hour session, so don't worry about it. I'm going to try to pack some of this into the hour that I have with you, but it's a really important subject. And if you're looking in the chat, I asked the question at the beginning of how many of your organizations actually have data governance frameworks, and some people have said that they do, and some that are looking to put them together. And so I'm going to start today by talking about what data governance frameworks are and why they're important and how they're different from models and approaches, and then specifically about how do we go about integrating AI into the data governance frameworks. So looking forward to sharing the subject with you. As you may know or may not know, this is episode 158 in the Real World Data Governance webinar series. So again, happy to have you here and looking forward to having you with us every third Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, which is what it is right now. On that subject, next month, again, another very relevant subject for organizations that I'm working with. Everybody's talking about how to do more with less with their data governance programs and talking about developing data asset inventories. And I'm going to share some highlights as to things that I'm working on with clients, things that you might want to consider when you are conducting, or how to go about, and why you might want to have that fully registered version of your data asset inventory within your organization. I will also be speaking at DATAVERSITY's Enterprise Data World and DGIQ West conference in Anaheim in May. I'm going to be giving a tutorial on data governance tools, templates, and techniques on the 5th of that month. I talk a lot about non-invasive data governance. There's now 3 books on the subject. I'll talk a little bit more about the 3rd book here in a second. I provide online learning plans through the DATAVERSITY Training Center and KIK Consulting. Knowledge is King is the name of my consulting business if you're interested in visiting the home of non-invasive data governance. The one last thing to add to that is, and I joke about it, but it's not really true. In my spare time, I am also a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University in their Chief Data and AI Officer Executive Certificate Program. But the big news is, and I was sharing this with Shannon before we started the webinar, is that just last week or the week before, the 3rd book in the series on non-invasive data governance was published. So the first book was called Non-Invasive Data Governance, The Path of Least Resistance and Greatest Success. The second one was called Non-Invasive Data Governance Strikes Again, because it had to have struck once in order for it to strike again. And the third one is really focused on empowering people in the organization to govern data and AI. And if you want to learn more about the book, I will be doing a webinar with DAMA South Africa, kind of a book launch webinar with them next week. I'll be talking all about the book. I also have online learning plans available through DATAVERSITY, as I mentioned, on non-invasive data governance and on non-invasive metadata governance. So please look for those as well. So we've got a whole bunch of interesting topics. First of all, I want to share with you a framework. I'm not here to sell you on this framework, but I want to share with you a framework that you might want to consider when you are building a framework around your data governance program. And before I even get into some of these subjects, I'm going to, again, differentiate between what in my opinion, is a framework and what's a model and what's an approach to data governance. And then we're going to talk about, well, how does the intersection of AI and data governance, how can that be represented within a framework? I'll talk about some key steps to integrating AI into your governance frameworks. And if you already have one, we'll talk a little bit about how can we integrate them into those frameworks, or if you use the one that I'm going to share with you. Again, that's something I'll just talk about. How do we go about integrating AI into the framework? We'll talk about managing insights and responsibly and ethically. I'll talk about overcoming the challenges in trying to integrate AI governance with your data governance program. Because still in many organizations, there's separate initiatives between AI governance and data governance, and they haven't kind of come together, at least the way that they will be coming together in the near future. And then the last thing I want to do is share some examples of some organizations that are successfully attempting and successfully integrating AI into their data governance initiatives and data governance frameworks. So at the beginning of the webinars, I typically share a couple of definitions with you. And the first three, real quickly, are data governance, data stewardship, and the definition of a data steward. So again, not to belabor these points, but I refer to data governance as being the execution and enforcement of authority over the management of data and data-related assets. And a lot of organizations look at that definition as being worded very strongly. And they try to temper it and make it a little bit less strongly or directly stated. I like the idea of execution and enforcement of authority, because at the end of the day, we need to truly govern our data in a way that it's not just a free-for-all, that people can do whatever they want. We need to execute and enforce authority over the data in order to improve data quality, improve data usefulness, improve metadata management. So I stick with that definition because I think it is pretty well focused on what needs to be done. You need to execute and enforce authority. I talk about stewardship as being the formal accountability for data. So there's a lot of people in the organization that have a relationship to data. If they are being held formally accountable for that relationship, they're a steward. If they're formally accountable for how they use data, they're taking care of the data for the organization. So thus, they are a steward. In fact, I've been known to say that potentially everybody in the organization is a data steward, because most people do have a relationship to the data. And if they're being held formally accountable for that relationship, then that could potentially be everybody within the organization. So let's talk about what a data governance framework is. And there's a lot of different data governance frameworks to choose from, but I have a pretty specific definition as to what I refer to a framework as. And so it is a structure, and it is a manner or a capability to organize your thoughts around something. So in this definition, I say that a data governance framework is a structure and a manner to organize a repeatable data governance approach that does a whole bunch of things. It outlines and enables policies, roles, processes, but really the underlying portion of that definition, it becomes a structure and a manner to kind of organize your thoughts around how we're going to go about implementing something within the organization. And in this specific example, we're obviously talking about data governance frameworks. So again, I'm going to share with you in a minute a structure that I've used. I've shared it in other webinars, but I want to talk about it specifically today in terms of how do we go about integrating AI into this structure and this way to organize our thoughts around data governance. So In a couple slides ago, I shared with you my definition of data governance as being the execution and enforcement of authority over something. Because at the end of the day, the government's not coming to you, the regulators aren't coming to you and asking you to follow the laws, to follow compliance rules, regulations. You need to execute and enforce authority. And at some point in the pretty near future, I'm thinking that organizations are going to be forced to be able to demonstrate in a transparent way that they're executing and enforcing authority over their data, because data has become everything to organizations these days, especially in the days of AI. So if that's my definition of data governance, let's apply it to the concept of AI governance. And so AI governance is the execution and enforcement of, and then as I say, I list things like policies, practices, oversight to ensure that your artificial intelligence systems are the things that it says here in that definition. But again, it comes back to the execution and enforcement of authority. Because at the end of the day, no matter whether you take a top-down command and control approach or a more traditional approach of if you build it, they will come, or a non-invasive approach, at the end of the day, you need to execute and enforce authority not only over data, but also over your AI and your AI climate and environment within your organization. So it seems as though when people talk about AI, they're really bringing data into the equation, as they should be. So what I did was I asked my favorite generative AI engine for some good quotes about why, or about how AI is really dependent on having governed data. And I just want to share with you real quickly what some of the responses were. So if you're familiar with the AI industry, you probably recognize several of the names: Andrew Ng, Fifi Lee, I believe is how it's pronounced, Tom Davenport. These are all people that if you're doing research on AI, they're all making statements like, without high quality, well-governed data, AI is just a guessing game. Or if your data's a mess, your AI is going to be a mess as well. Governance is something that's not optional. So obviously we're here today to talk about how do we take AI and kind of integrate it into this structure, this way to organize our thoughts around data governance. So I asked ChatGPT for a couple more definitions. And as you can see, here's a couple from Doug Laney and Bernard Marr and Kate Crawford. That AI is basically, without governance, is like a self-driving car with a dirty windshield. It won't get real far. I'm not sure if Doug ever actually said that, but ChatGPT tells me that he did. And AI amplifies data quality, whether it's good or bad in your organization. The really funny thing, and the reason I'm sharing all these quotes with you, is because they also provided this quote. And some guy named Bob Seiner, the inventor of non-invasive data governance, at some point probably said, data governance isn't bureaucracy, it's the seatbelt that AI needs to drive business intelligence safely. I can't remember where exactly I used that, if I used that, but again, take your results from ChatGPT or whatever your favorite Gen AI engine is with a grain of salt. But the point that I'm really trying to make is that AI is really heavily dependent on having good quality governed data that feeds the AI engines within our organization. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk just for a brief moment about the differences between frameworks and models and approaches, because the term framework is used a lot, the term model is used a lot, even the term approach is used a lot. But like I had said before, the framework is literally that structure that helps you to organize your thoughts around data governance. And when I share with you the framework that I use, you'll see there's 6 core components of data governance, and you can add to that or you can decrease that number and really craft the framework to match what your organization needs. But again, it's just a structure that you can use. And then in my framework, I'm looking at each of those core components from each of the different perspectives of the executive level of the organization, strategic, tactical, operational, all the way down to the support levels of your organization. But that's really what a framework is. It's providing that structure to organize your thoughts. And what we're going to do in this webinar is talk about ways to integrate AI into that framework for data governance. You probably hear the term model used quite a bit. I refer to my operating model of roles and responsibilities. That's something that's typically more specific representation than the framework has in itself. So it provides that blueprint or schematic as to how a certain aspect of the framework can be utilized, can be operationalized within an organization. So again, the example that I use the most is the operating model. If you've been to my webinars in the past, it's a pyramid diagram that represents the different levels of the organization and the data governance roles that are associated with each of those levels. So that's the model, and there's communication models and role models and those types of things within organizations. And then there's approaches. And I typically talk about those three approaches: that command and control top-down approach, the traditional approach of, and again, if you build a program that people in the organization will gravitate toward it, or the non-invasive approach of there's already people in the organization that are governing. We can work with them, help to formalize their accountability, help them to recognize that they themselves are data stewards, and start following the steps that are necessary to improve the quality and the value that our organizations get from the data within the organization. So I've talked a little bit just in sharing some words with you as to what my framework looks like. And this is the non-invasive data governance framework, but it doesn't really become non-invasive until you start to fill in some of these blanks. So I often refer to the core components of a successful governance program as being the data, the roles, the processes, communications, metrics, and tools. And I've had people make suggestions as to other columns to add, or that we can remove certain columns. When I started with this framework, the data column didn't exist, but we obviously need to know what data is important at the executive level and the strategic, the tactical, operational, and support level of the organization. So again, this is just the framework. This is the structure or the way to organize your thoughts around implementing data governance. And as I said, it doesn't really become non-invasive until really the way that you go about filling in the squares of the framework. So here's another example of that framework with some verbiage filled in. And as you see, as we go through this webinar, I'll talk to you about different ways of filling in the content within the framework. But if we just focus on the roles column, and I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing with my mouse, I think you can. Typically there's an executive level at the executive steering committee level at your organization. You may have a data governance council or a committee at the strategic level. You might have data owners or data domain stewards, subject matter experts at more of a tactical cross-business function level of your organization, operational data stewards, and then the people that are running the program and the partners of data governance within your organization. So that's just an example of how to read through the framework. And then you also want to know, well, how are we going to communicate about data governance with and what's important to the people at the different levels of the organization? So we know that the executive management needs to support, sponsor, and understand data governance. We know at the strategic level, they need to evaluate and commend and make recommendations also to the organization as to how they can better govern their data. In the metrics and tools, again, I could spend the whole hour walking through this framework and kind of going through each of the individual blocks. But the point is, again, the structure of the framework needs to be filled in by your organization. And I'm going to talk to you here about some ways that you can go about doing that. Just a couple other things about the framework before I get into how to go about filling it in. I think I've been talking about this at least in the last couple of webinars, how I'm taking the framework and I'm digitizing it and going to provide it as a tool to help organizations. Again, it's the same concept. I've got the same components across the top. I've got the same levels down the left-hand side. The digitized framework will have steps to take you from one level of maturity to another level of maturity within each of the bridges. But again, it's just advancing on the whole concept of the non-invasive data governance framework. And then everything that will be behind that version will focus specifically on being non-invasive in your approach to governance. I mentioned earlier on also that I did a webinar, or I'm sorry, I did a tutorial at the DGIQ East Conference in Washington, D.C. in December. And I had actually done something very similar to it several months earlier, I think at the DGIQ West Conference as well, where I basically spent the session going through the framework and providing questions to people that were in attendance to say, well, what do we need to be asking ourselves to fill in the different blocks of the framework? And so I started out by saying, okay, well, what and how will AI and data be used by each of these different levels? But I then also wanted to add specific questions. So let's just walk through each of the columns one by one in the framework and see what some of the questions are. Shannon, I'm going to attach to what I send back to you to share with all the attendees and the registrants today, these two slides from that presentation so they can see, or maybe I'll just send the one that has the questions and answers. But if you can think about what the questions are that need to be answered within each of the blocks of the framework, that will help you to customize the framework specifically to your organization. So for the data column, one question would be, what AI and data is critical for decision making at the executive level? And that's an important question to ask. And if you don't have the answer to the question, you should be looking for the answer to the question in your organization. And how should data be accessed, shared, and used at each of these levels? Or what are the AI and data policies? Now, I know that on the bottom right of the screen here, that's kind of in pretty small print. So I'm going to want to share those with you so you can see them. But if you think about what data and what AI and data is critical for decision making at the executive level, they need AI-driven insights for market trends, risk forecasts. Again, at the strategic level, they need AI data related to customer behavior and operational metrics. So again, I'm not telling you how to fill in the squares of the framework, what I refer to as bridges between those core components across the top and the levels down the side. But at some point in time, you should recognize what questions need to be asked and what questions need to be answered. And you can complete your framework to address those things within your organization. So that's just the data column. Let's take a look at the same thing for the roles column. And the questions are, what are the AI and data related roles and responsibilities and accountabilities that are going to be required at each of those levels? And it's good to, again, go through the executive level and answer it: strategic, tactical, operational, and support. How should related communication and collaboration be facilitated with the roles at each of those levels? What are the skills, knowledge, and training that are required? If we're truly going to become an AI data-enabled organization, what are the skills, knowledge, and training that are required for each role? Again, that's a way to start to integrate AI into your data governance framework if you're using a framework that is similar to this. Let's talk about processes. What are the AI and data related processes and workflows that are important at each of the different levels of the organization? And again, I'm sharing these with you because they seem to go over pretty well in the tutorial that I gave back in DC. And it sparked a lot of conversation between people that were attending who wanted to share ideas as to, well, what would they put in that block, in that specific piece, that specific bridge within the framework. Again, the framework is really just the tool to help you to start to organize and structure your thoughts around something. And again, you need to, or I would suggest filling it in a way that would be less invasive or less threatening to the organization. But again, this webinar is truly about, well, how do we go and fill in these blocks of the framework with relevant information that's going to help us to increase our cause, to improve our chances of being successful with governance, with AI and with data governance within the organization. Same thing to ask about communications. That's the fourth core component, is what are the communication needs of the organization? We know we're going to communicate differently with the people at the executive level than we are with people at the operational level. What are the messages that we're going to need to send to them? So what are the AI and data communication needs? How should related information be disseminated? with these different audiences. Again, you're not going to communicate the same thing or the same way with people at the different levels of your organization. And then what's your overall strategy, governance plan and strategy for AI and data governance at each of those different levels? And again, I'm not intending to provide you the answers on the bottom right part of the screen right here, but just to give you some ideas as to you're going to have different answers depending on the different audiences that you ask these questions to. And these are, again, ways to start to integrate AI into your data governance framework. I'll go more quickly through the last two of the roles, but just to think, what are the KPIs and metrics? How should these metrics be collected, analyzed, and reported? Are there targets for these metrics? Again, these are questions that need to be answered from the perspective of each of the different levels of the organization. And then the last one, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on these. The tools. What are the tools that are important at each of the different levels of the organization? What are the AI and data governance tools? Do we need directives? Do we need policies? Do we need instructions coming from the highest level of the organization? Those may not be technology tools, but they may be tools that are necessary at the executive level, all the way down to the data catalog and your data quality tools at the more tactical and operational levels. Again, these are questions that just kind of spur some thought in your mind as to what are some of the things that we could use to fill in this framework and help to advance, the organization. I had a client recently who took the data governance framework and actually made it into an interactive guide where you could go as part of their internal website, their intranet site. So if people wanted to get information about the roles at different level or the ways that communication are taking place, they could just click on the blocks and get to the information that they needed about their program within their organization. So over time, you've probably seen different versions of the framework. This is one that I put together as a prototype before I started to develop the digitized version of the framework. But I also just wanted to share with you that you can fill it in even in the matrix itself. And this one is specific, as it says in the upper left-hand corner. Whoops, where'd it go? To the AI integration. I had a client recently that said, okay, well, what are the specific challenges that need to be filled in for each of these bridges? Again, the framework is just that structure to give you an idea as to how to organize your thoughts around something in your organization. And we're talking specifically about data governance and now about how to integrate AI into this framework for data governance within our organization. So when I started to put together this slide deck, it was a great idea to show the framework again, the smaller version in the bottom middle of the screen, and just start highlighting the blocks or the bridges within the framework that were being touched on in the subjects that have to do with the intersection of AI and data governance. What I started to find was that it became a real mess and that it started to cover more blocks than I thought. Then I started that, okay, maybe I'll just work column by column, component by component. I'm just going to keep the framework on the diagram and spend a little bit of time talking to you about each of these next few subjects. So the first one is the intersection of AI and data governance. And some of these statements, you've probably heard them before. I might have even mentioned them earlier in the webinar today, that AI is truly only as good as the data that it uses. And I know that I've talked quite a bit about the unification of data governance and information governance. Information governance being the governance of unstructured data, and data governance being more of the governance around structured data. By structured data, I mean databases and tables and columns and bits and bytes of data that way. By unstructured data, I'm talking about records management, content management, document management. AI really literally doesn't care where it gets its data from, but it does get its data from structured and unstructured sources. And AI is only as good as the data that it uses. So that's certainly a reason why we as practitioners need to provide the best governed data that we can to our AI engines. Data governance ensures compliance, quality, and trust. Otherwise, there's nobody, I say data governance as being the execution and enforcement of authority. There needs to be somebody who is making certain that we are being compliant, that we're delivering quality data with quality results. And I've talked about this in previous webinars as well, that trust factor, that confidence level that people have in the data. You're going to improve the compliance, the quality, and the trust by improving the governance over the data. And I say here that AI governance extends and reinforces data governance practices, but I think the same thing can also hold true in reverse, that data governance practices can reinforce now what organizations are talking to as AI governance practices within their organization. And integrating AI into data governance requires a strategic approach. I'm always an advocate of trying to stay as non-invasive as we can in our approach to data governance. So the intersection of AI and data governance is really important as we start to integrate AI into our data governance frameworks. Again, I have a picture of the framework. Should have shut my phone off. These are some of the key steps to integrating AI into your data governance framework. Again, assuming that you have a governance framework that you're beginning with, is to define your roles and responsibilities. Who at the executive level is the owner of artificial intelligence, or the owner of specific use cases around artificial intelligence? Who are the people that know the data and know the rules that need to be followed as part of our AI initiatives, as part of our AI governance initiatives? So one of the first steps to integrating AI into your governance framework is maybe to focus on that roles column. That's the first one that I talked about in the webinar today, where I talked about the executive steering committee. I talked about the Data Governance Council. I've seen many organizations these days that are starting to create ESGs, executive steering committees, on the whole topic of data governance, or on the whole topic, should I say, of artificial intelligence. The organizations that have data governance programs that have been around for a while, there's typically a steering committee, but I'm seeing executive steering committees being stood up around AI. So that would be something that you would want to include within the roles column of your framework. Embedding AI policies, and that's where I was going to highlight the tools column, the policies within your organization. Which ones are coming from what parts of the organization, and who are the people that need to follow the policies that are being defined? So again, defining the policies, defining at each of the different levels who the people are in the organization that these things need to be communicated to, and how we need to have a way to execute and enforce authority over these things. So ensuring quality, lineage, and ethical use for your AI models, monitoring, measuring, and continuously improving your practices. Again, these are the considerations or things that you may want to consider as you're fleshing out your governance framework and integrating AI as part of it. Again, I was gonna highlight each of the bridges, and I decided at the last second to take them off because it didn't make for a good image for you to see. But I guess the point is that each of these statements could apply to many of the different bridges within the framework. So certainly ways of managing AI-driven insight responsibly and ethically is to establish guidelines for how you're going to be making decisions coming out of your AI models, for ensuring transparency and explainability in your models, for monitoring whatever bias that we're trying to avoid through governance in our AI models, and aligning our insights with those things that we are being checked on, that are regulatory and organizational standards that we are applying across our organizations. And then the last set of topics I just want to go through quickly with you is, what are some of the challenges that you might run into when you take your data governance framework and start to integrate AI into it? Well, we know, because I hear it every day from the organizations that I talk to and the organizations that I work with, that data quality and the dimensions of data quality seem to be the most important driving factor of data governance right now, at least. And that quality directly relates to the data that's being made available through AI. So we need to one of the things that we need to do to overcome the challenges in AI integration is to address data quality and how we're going to make the data available for AI. We need to balance the fun and unique ways that we're going to innovate and use AI with the controls that we know we need to govern around the data and around the use of AI within the organizations. We need to navigate regulatory uncertainty. We need to make certain in a demonstrable way that we are actually following the rules and the regulatory and compliance concerns that are being imposed upon our organizations. So the last thing that I want to do before I turn this over to Shannon and see if we have any questions today is talk about a couple of different examples or 4 different examples of organizations that haven't necessarily created their data governance frameworks. And I'm not going to name these organizations by name, but they're at least thinking of how do they go about integrating AI and data governance together within their organization. So I'm going to talk about a financial services organization that was using AI for risk and fraud detection, talk about a healthcare organization that is really focusing on AI-powered diagnostics and the importance of data integrity for those diagnostics, in a retail organization, an organization I was working with recently that was very concerned about overstepping their ethical bounds in what they knew about their customers and the products that they were purchasing. I'll talk about that in a second here as well. And then in government, AI transparency and accountability, just in general in the public services. So wait, let's go back to, sorry about that, the financial services. So these are some of the things that they were considering as they were integrating AI into their data governance programs and into their data governance frameworks, is they came to the realization that they're going to have a very difficult time using AI to fight fraud if they don't have quality data. So then there's an explanation of what I mean by that, how the models may miss threats or flag false positives in terms of the risk and fraud protection. That risk management requires that your AI is going to have some level of guardrails around it as well. That regulatory compliance is not something that I mentioned this before. The government is not coming to us and saying, these are the laws, these are the rules, these are the regulatory concerns that you need to address. They're not asking organizations to do that. So it's not negotiable. Can we use the different bridges and the different components and levels within the framework to start to document how we're going to make certain that we're going to address the regulatory concerns at each of those different levels of the organization? And AI governance, I mean, the hopes, the intention of AI is that it's going to reduce costly mistakes within our organizations. In the healthcare industry, there's many healthcare organizations that are presently using AI to help them with their diagnostic tools. And they come to a realization that AI governance, AI diagnosis or diagnosis that come from the use of AI are really only as accurate as the data that it learns from. And that governance, the intention of data governance is to reduce their misdiagnosis, but also to make certain that the patient data is clean and that they're providing effective quality information to the tools that are making these diagnoses. And we got to make certain that their regulatory compliance and the patients trust where their data is being used and how it's being used, and that governance supports fair and equitable healthcare decisions. That's where organizations right now are looking to take their AI and integrate it with or combine it with their data governance initiatives. When DATAVERSITY held the first AI governance conference in DC, or as part of the conference, it was very noticeable that a lot of people were attending the sessions that were bringing together AI governance and data governance. So we're seeing not only a convergence of structured data governance and unstructured data governance, we're also seeing a convergence of AI governance and data governance in general. In the retail industry, it's kind of funny. Several years ago, my wife and I started receiving advertisements for or coupons for diapers. well, my kids are in their late 20s and 30s. I don't think they need diapers anymore, but they're using some of the data. They're making decisions based on the data they have about us and about our purchasing habits. So we got to make certain that organizations, and they're using AI to assure that they're providing the personalization without overstepping any privacy boundaries within their organization. So they don't want to cross the ethical lines as they're using AI to use data and to address their customer needs more. Balancing data-driven insights with consumer trust, preventing bias. That's one of the main concerns in organizations, is to make certain that we're trying to prevent bias in what we're doing. And the only way that that's going to happen is if somebody is executing and enforcing authority over how AI is using the data, how the data itself is being governed. Compliant and ethical use of customer data, that's a big concern for most retail organizations. And then the last example I want to share with you is with the government. And I have had the honor and privilege of working with several government agencies that are all talking about AI. But especially in this day and age right now, they're having a hard time getting really serious about AI, at least in a way that covers the entire agency, the entire part of the organization. So AI transparency and accountability in public service is very important to them, ensuring that their decisions are transparent. So when somebody goes back and makes a decision based on the data that they are receiving, that there's some level of transparency. Where did those numbers come from? Who was responsible for them? What was the quality of the data that they used? And again, the government is interested in preventing bias, providing additional levels of accountability through their AI models, and balancing innovation with ethical use. So again, just some examples in several different industries as to ways that organizations are considering integrating AI into their data governance programs and their data governance frameworks. So the last thing I want to leave you with before I turn this back to Shannon is just to kind of go back to the framework that I shared with you at the beginning. Again, it's just a container. It is a structured way for putting your thoughts together around the most important things in implementing something within your organization. And again, this time it's non-invasive data governance. So how do we go about integrating some AI into that? Well, you can see under the roles of the leadership, the stewards, the owners, and those types of things are defined within the roles column. So I hope this was helpful to you, at least in considering, what should your data governance framework look like? And what are some of the questions that you might want to be asking yourself as you go about completing your data governance framework? So I talked about the framework itself, the intersection of AI and data governance. I spent a couple minutes talking about those key steps to integrating AI into your framework, managing the AI-driven insights, overcoming challenges, and then I ended with sharing with you 4 examples of different industries where they're considering integrating AI into their governance frameworks. And with that, Shannon, I'm going to turn it back to you and see if we have any questions today.
We do indeed. Lots of great questions coming in. And just to answer the most commonly asked questions, just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Monday to all registrants with links to the slides, links to the recording, and additional things that Bob has already mentioned to everybody. But so diving in here, Bob, if you are a small higher ed organization with data governance, we are using non-invasive data governance. Yeah, that's great. Can we incorporate AI into the data governance, or does it need to be separate?
That's a great question. That's like the $10 million question. In many organizations right now, it is separate, but they're going to come to a realization that the AI that they are providing, even in a smaller university or college, is going to be dependent on quality data. So I still think, and I've written articles about this on LinkedIn, that connecting data governance and AI governance, in fact, I think the article was called, you won't be sorry if you connect your AI governance with your data governance. And then there's ... unless you don't. So at some point, there will be a bringing together of AI and data governance. I would say that they should be partners. They should be working together from the very beginning instead of it coming to a realization, oh, our AI group needs to start talking to our data group. I would try to integrate those two as early as possible.
Indeed. So how can we incorporate AI in data quality?
AI into data quality. Well, first of all, in most organizations, at least the ones that I've had experience and had conversations with, their AI is not attempting to be used around all of their data. There's going to be a specific set of data that's going to feed their AI models, their AI engines. And so specifically focusing on the quality of the data within those resources. And those resources could be structured data resources with databases and information systems. They could be unstructured resources. They could be email. Again, focusing on the quality that is specifically feeding your AI engine might be a really good place to start. So back in the days when organizations were, well, I guess they're still focusing on business intelligence and data warehousing. They would focus their data quality initiatives on specific data that was feeding their data warehouses and their business intelligence engines. I think that's a good approach for organizations today. If they're looking to integrate AI, integrate data governance, and to have as a result improved data quality, focus on specifically the resources that are feeding your AI engines.
So, Bob, is data governance auditable? Are there exclusive specific standards, templates for governance compliance requirements, and other data privacy compliance regulations?
That's a fantastic question, Shannon. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. And to be honest with you, I don't know of any. But I do know that organizations that are being audited and that their result findings are that they need to implement data governance. That's just the first step. They're saying where there's a lack of formal accountability around, for example, data classification and who can see and who can use what data. Right now, the auditors are finding that if organizations don't have formal programs to do these things, they're very strongly recommending that organizations are putting these governance programs into place. Is it going to need to be auditable at some point? I think that's the next step for organizations that do have data governance programs, is to make certain that you can demonstrate that you know who has access to the data that you're sharing with them, and that you're at least doing a pretty good job of educating those people as to how that data can be used and cannot be used. So yes, I see it as it's going to need to be auditable at some point. But I mean, so we need to be able to record who our stewards are, what data they have access to. We need to be transparent with that information. So yes, I do believe we will need to be auditable at some point in time.
And Bob, is a data governance manager also a data steward?
Maybe a different subject for a different day, but that's a good question. So was the data governance manager also a data steward? My first answer to that question would be yes. If they, as a data governance manager, define and or produce and or use data as part of their job, and they're being held accountable for how they define, produce, or use data, then they are a steward. They would also, so they might appear in multiple places within your data governance framework. They may be a support role as being the administrator of the program, but they may also, and this could happen, I don't know if I've necessarily seen it, they could also be a subject matter expert around a specific type of data. Or I would say potentially they are a subject matter expert of the metadata that is associated with their data governance program. So the easy answer is a data manager also a data governance manager also a data steward? I would say if they are part of the organization and they have a relationship to the data, the answer to that question would be yes.
Nice. So what kind of data quality tools can we apply on AI?
I think that's a good question as well. So what types of data quality tools? I saw that somebody mentioned in the comments, automated anomaly detection and rule prescription and those types of things. I think that came from a friend of mine who posted that comment in the chat. So thank you for that. I think that any of the data quality tools that are going to help you to improve the dimensions, the basically, I think Dama defines it as 8 dimensions of data quality. Those are the types of tools. I'm not a data quality tool expert, but some of those things that Chris had mentioned, the automated anomaly detection, looking for patterns in the data, looking for changes to the results in the data. All of those types of data quality tools will help you to improve your AI.
Is there any key additional questions or steps a data company should ask or take to data governance and AI integration, given we have data from vendors, company data, and data we create to use or sell?
Well, first of all, I think that the first thing that I would do is I would become very intentional in your efforts. So instead of just thinking that these things are going to morph and merge and work together, I'd be very intentional in setting up a formal governance program. It doesn't mean that it has to be invasive. It doesn't mean that it has to be command and control. So, I mean, I think that's one of the first steps is to really to start to get very intentional about having a formal governance program. When I talk about the definition of stewardship as being the formalized accountability, in most organizations, there's already a level of accountability associated with people's relationships to the data, but those relationships are very informal. So as a second step, the first one being be intentional is, be smart in how you go about recognizing the people in your organization that are most knowledgeable about your data. So I always say instead of assigning people to be data stewards, recognize the people in the organization that are already stewarding the data and maybe doing it informally and formalize that first. Make it feel as though you're not handing them something that is significantly over and above what they are presently doing. It's the best way that you can get them to come around to your side of the table to understand that yes, I am a steward. Yes, I do these things with the data. So just formalizing existing levels of accountability would be another really good step to take initially.
I love it. Lots of great questions coming in too. And we have about 8 minutes left, so certainly time for a few more. So, Bob, from your experience, how long does it typically take for large financial organizations to successfully implement data governance frameworks? I've seen 12 to 18 in general, but seems like a short term when handling complex data.
To put a time limit or put a timeline around it of 12 to 18 months is probably risky. I would say that and I'm very serious about this, that it can be a lot quicker than 12 to 18 months. You can start demonstrating value from formalizing accountability, from communicating with people within a couple of months within your organizations. Again, if it's a large global organization, it's obviously going to take more time. You're going to get more people involved in the conversation, but there's no reason why by starting with a formal data governance framework that you can't start demonstrating some level of value to your organization much quicker than 12 to 18 months. In fact, I would almost suggest that if you're going to go to your organization and tell them that it's going to be 12 to 18 months before you can demonstrate value and success, they're going to lose interest very fast. So say that we're going to start small. We're going to do this incrementally. In earlier webinars, I've always talked about instead of taking a slice of the pie, instead of just focusing on just a slice of your organization, you may even want to consider focusing on a slice of the pie and something that's even smaller to demonstrate its value. So again, 12 to 18 months maybe to have it fully engulfed within your organization. But if you're going to really wait 12 to 18 months to be able to demonstrate value to your organization from your program, it could be a losing proposition.
Interesting, very interesting. So, Bob, if data governance is not yet mature, what if data governance is not yet mature? Can it ever be too soon to integrate AI, given it's also in a nascent stage? The concern behind this question is about trying to boil the ocean.
Yeah, I think I understand. So if your program isn't demonstrating success, if it's not completely formalized, does it make sense to try to integrate AI into that? And I think that's how I understand the question. It depends. It's a great consulting answer, right? It depends. It really depends on to what level of maturity in different levels of your organization that the level of maturity of data governance in the different levels of the organization. In the parts of the organization where they've done a valid inventory of the data, where they've recognized the people and their relationship to the data, maybe it's not too soon to get started. If you start including the integration of AI and when your program really has a complete lack of maturity or is brand new, then I would again make it an intentional effort to have AI and data governance working together from the very beginning and set it up that way. So, train your AI people to work with your data governance people and your data governance people to work with your AI people, if in fact they're different audiences. But I think that's probably the best way. If you don't have you don't need to wait until your program is fully mature to be governing the data that are feeding your AI models. So maybe that's a better way of answering the question.
All right. Okay. I think I'm going to try and slip in one more question here. And
No, I
Bob, this
left
is,
you a lot of time for questions today.
you did. I know. I love it because there's so many great questions, and there always are. So it's really, really good. And I think we have enough time for at least one more. We got about 4 minutes left.
Sure.
And we get this question often, Bob. It's a common problem, to implement framework and a culture of data within an organization. How should I approach executives?
Well, my simple answer to that is not to introduce data governance as something that is brand new, and recognize that governance has already been taking place in your organization that's 10 or 15 or 50 or 100 years old. Your organization will have not gotten to where it is presently with a complete lack of governance. Somebody's making decisions. Somehow decisions are being made. We need to recognize, first of all, we need to review and see if that's working efficiently and effectively for us. In many cases, it's not working efficiently and effectively. And the reason why is because it's not formal. So I always group these words together, the word formal or informal with inefficient and ineffective. If it's informal, the governance around the data is going to be informal and it's going to be inefficient and ineffective. If you formalize the governance, meaning that you formalize the accountability of the stewards, you formalize the execution and enforcement of authority, then you're going to then things are going to be governed better. So I would say, how do we get started? Recognize, and how do we sell it to our executives? Have them know that this is not something that is brand new. You have been governing for a long time. You've just been doing it informally. And if we can use a method like the non-invasive approach or use a framework like the non-invasive data governance framework to help to organize our thoughts around it, I think that's a good step. But my first message to management, to leadership, would be this is not new to us. We have been doing this forever. We can do this better. Let me tell you how.
Perfect. Well, Bob, that is perfect timing. That brings us right to the top of the hour. Thank you so much. And for all the questions coming in, I will get these over to Bob, who will answer, will commit, will answer the questions to be included in the follow-up email that I will send by end of day Monday to all registrants with links to the slides and links to the recording, along with the other things. To everybody. Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to next month when we talk about how to conduct a data inventory.
Oh, that's a good one too. All right, y'all. Have a good one.
Take
Thanks so
care.
much. Ciao.
Thank you.